Who took the first step on Earth? Imagine standing at the edge of time, looking across a planet that has just been born, a world still glowing from the fires of creation, oceans steaming with heat, and skies swirling with gases that seem hostile to life. In this vast emptiness, the question arises, who took the very first step on Earth? It is a question that pulls us into the depths of curiosity, not just about our origins as humans, but about the origins of every creature that ever walked, crawled, or swam on this planet. To wonder about the first step is to wonder about the very heartbeat of existence, the moment when lifeless stone and water gave way to motion, when stillness surrendered to movement, and when silence broke with the rhythm of life's earliest footsteps. This is not merely a scientific question, but also a philosophical one, because to understand the first step is to understand the story of Earth itself, a tale that stretches across billions of years, through struggles of survival, and into the rise of beings like us who can look back and ask such questions. The journey to uncover who, or what took the first step on Earth is not a simple one. It requires us to travel back, far beyond recorded history, beyond even the earliest human civilizations, to a time when Earth was nothing more than molten rock and hostile seas. It challenges us to reconsider what we mean by step. Do we mean the first motion of a microbe that wriggled in the depths of the ocean? Or do we mean the first creature that lifted itself out of the sea and walked across solid land? Or perhaps, from a human-centered view, we are speaking of the first man or woman who left their footprints on the soil of Earth as the dawn of humanity began. Every answer tells a different story, yet together they form a greater narrative about how life evolved, struggled, and triumphed. When we think of a step, we imagine something simple, like lifting a foot and placing it on the ground. But in the grand story of Earth, a step is a symbol, the symbol of life moving forward, of courage against uncertainty, and of progress written in the dust of time. The first step on Earth, in whatever form it came, was a revolution. It was the turning of the key that unlocked all of life's potential, leading to forests that sway with trees, oceans teeming with fish, lands roamed by dinosaurs, and eventually cities filled with humans. Every step we take today echoes that first step, reminding us that life has always been about moving forward, about exploring new ground, and about daring to survive where survival once seemed impossible. And so the story begins. To answer the question of who took the first step on Earth, we must embark on a journey across time itself. We must travel from the birth of the planet to the rise of life, from the struggles of early organisms to the first creatures that ventured onto land, from the footsteps of animals to the footprints of humankind. This is not just the story of a single step, it is the story of every step that followed, building a chain of existence that stretches unbroken to this very moment where you and I ponder the mystery. The Earth is a stage, and countless actors have walked upon it. But who was the first? That is the question that will lead us deep into the greatest story ever told, the story of life on Earth. To understand who took the first step on Earth, we must travel back not just thousands or millions of years, but billions. The Earth, our home, was not always the lush green planet we see today. Around 4.5 billion years ago, it was nothing more than a young ball of molten rock, born from the fiery remains of a star. The early solar system was a chaotic place, filled with clouds of gas, swirling dust, and fragments of rock colliding violently with one another. From this chaos, Earth emerged. Its surface was covered with lava, its skies thick with toxic gases, and its oceans not yet formed. It was a place where no living creature could survive, yet it was the very foundation upon which life would later take its first steps. The early Earth was shaped by both violence and beauty. Comets and asteroids crashed into its surface, bringing not only destruction but also gifts, water, and essential elements that would one day be the building blocks of life. Volcanic eruptions painted the skies with fire, and the constant rumbling of the Earth's crust created mountains and valleys. Slowly, as the planet cooled, steam condensed into rain, and over millions of years, oceans began to form. These vast bodies of water became the cradle of life, the place where the earliest whispers of existence would stir. The Earth was no longer just rock and fire, It had transformed into a canvas waiting for the brush of life to paint its first strokes. But in these earliest times, the question of a step had no meaning. There were no creatures with legs, no footprints pressed into soft soil. The earth was silent except for the roar of nature's forces. And yet, hidden in the bubbling depths of the oceans, something miraculous began to happen. Tiny, invisible forms of life, simple cells appeared. Whether they came from the spark of lightning striking a primordial soup of chemicals, or from building blocks delivered by comets, remains a mystery scientists still debate. What matters is that they arrived, and in their arrival, the possibility of the first step was born. These microorganisms could not walk, but they could move, divide, and adapt. Their presence marked the beginning of a journey that would eventually lead to creatures that could step, crawl, and stride across the Earth's surface. The birth of Earth is more than just a scientific event. It is a reminder of how fragile and rare life truly is. Imagine, for a moment, the countless chances for failure that could have stopped the story before it began. If the planet had not cooled at the right time, if water had not collected in its basins, if essential elements had not come together, there might never have been life at all. The Earth was like a stage being carefully prepared for a performance, every detail arranged so that one day, the first actors, life itself, could enter. The silence of stone and sea was only temporary. The Earth was waiting, as if holding its breath, for that first movement of life that would forever change its destiny. When we look back at the birth of Earth, we see that it was not a place instantly ready for life's first steps. Instead, it was a long process of preparation. It reminds us that beginnings are rarely sudden. They are often slow, shaped by patience and persistence. Just as a seed lies dormant before breaking into a sprout, the earth lay barren before blooming with life. And when that bloom finally came, it was not in the form of a giant leap, but in the smallest, most delicate steps of microscopic organisms in the ocean. To know who took the first step on Earth, we must first honor the stage upon which it happened, a world transformed from chaos into the possibility of life. When we think of the first step on Earth, our minds instinctively picture a foot pressing against soil, leaving behind an imprint of movement. But the true story begins much earlier, in a world without feet, without soil, and without creatures as we know them. The earliest steps of life were invisible, taken not with legs but with molecules. Somewhere in Earth's ancient oceans, perhaps around hydrothermal vents deep beneath the waves or in shallow pools warmed by the sun, the first living cells emerged. These cells did not walk, but they moved, multiplied, and adapted, marking the beginning of the most extraordinary journey in history, the journey of life itself. Their movements, though microscopic, were the first motions of Earth's living story, the earliest steps toward everything that would follow. Life's first forms were simple, prokaryotes, single-celled organisms without a nucleus. Yet within their fragile walls, they carried the blueprint of survival. They absorbed energy from their environment, reproduced by division, and adapted to the changing conditions of the planet. In time, some of these cells learned to harness sunlight, giving birth to photosynthesis. This was a revolutionary step, for it meant that life could now generate its own energy from the endless power of the sun. The consequence was profound. Oxygen began to fill the atmosphere. Though at first toxic to many ancient organisms, oxygen would become the foundation for more complex life forms, creatures that could breathe and eventually walk upon the land. The invisible movements of these first cells, floating, splitting, adapting, were the quiet footsteps that laid the path for every grand stride to come. Over millions of years, life diversified in the oceans. Single-celled organisms joined together, forming multicellular beings. These new forms of life could specialize, some cells for movement, others for feeding, others for protection. It was as if nature was experimenting with different designs, preparing for the creatures that would one day dominate the seas, skies, and land. The first primitive animals, soft-bodied and strange, appeared in the oceans more than 600 million years ago. They lacked bones, shells, or limbs, but they could move through water, swim across currents, and anchor themselves to rocks. These were not steps in the human sense, but they were the first deliberate movements of animals, the first explorations of Earth's possibilities. Then came the Cambrian explosion, a period about 541 million years ago, when life suddenly burst into diversity. Creatures with exoskeletons, eyes, and segmented bodies filled the seas. Some could crawl along the ocean floor, others could swim powerfully through the water. The Earth was alive with motion, and in that motion, we can begin to see the shadow of what we might call the first step. Trilobites scuttled across seabeds, worms wriggled into sediments, and primitive arthropods tested their ability to push against surfaces. The ocean floor, once silent, now bore the marks of moving creatures. Each track pressed into the mud was a precursor to the footprints that would someday appear on dry land. These early steps of life were not confined to survival. They were acts of exploration. Every tiny organism that swam, crawled, or clung to a rock was testing the boundaries of what life could do. The Earth, once empty, now vibrated with living motion. And in these first stirrings, we see the essence of stepping forward, the courage to move into the unknown, to risk survival in exchange for discovery. While no single creature from this era can be crowned as the one who took the very first step, together they represent the dawn of movement, the foundation upon which future footsteps, both animal and human, would be built. In truth, the first steps of life were not taken on land but in the sea, in the swaying dance of cells, the wriggling of worms, and the scuttling of trilobites. They remind us that stepping is not only about walking with legs but about the very act of moving forward, of venturing beyond stillness. Without these early pioneers of movement, the Earth's surface would have remained barren, waiting endlessly for footsteps that might never have come. The story of the first step begins in the depths of the oceans, in the bravery of life's earliest attempts to move, explore, and survive. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans were the sole stage of life. Every act of movement, every struggle for survival, every evolutionary experiment played out beneath the waves. But the Earth's landmasses lay silent, untouched by living footsteps. No forests shaded the soil, no creatures stirred across the plains. The continents were barren landscapes of rock and sand, shaped by wind and rain, but unmarked by life. Yet, slowly, life began to eye this unexplored frontier. The oceans, though vast, were also crowded and dangerous. To venture onto land promised risk, but it also promised opportunity, fresh territory, new food sources, and freedom from aquatic predators. The greatest migration in history was about to begin, the journey from sea to land. The first pioneers of land were not animals, but plants and fungi. About 470 million years ago, small moss-like plants and lichen-like organisms began to cling to the edges of coastlines. They did not walk, but in their stillness, they laid the foundation for those who would. These early plants spread across moist ground, creating patches of greenery that held the soil and offered shade. Soon, they evolved vascular systems that allowed them to grow taller, eventually giving rise to the first forests. The land, once barren, began to transform into a living environment, one capable of sustaining more complex organisms. Without these plant pioneers, the later steps of animals would have found no nourishment, no oxygen-rich atmosphere to breathe. The Earth was being prepared for the first footsteps, as if nature itself knew what was to come. The earliest animals to explore land were invertebrates, likely arthropods, relatives of insects, spiders, and crabs. Fossil evidence suggests that millipede-like creatures may have crawled onto land more than 400 million years ago. Imagine a world where the first lines in the sand were not drawn by the wind, but by the segmented legs of ancient crawlers. They were small, primitive, and fragile, but they were pioneers. Their steps were uncertain, their bodies adapted to moist environments, but they broke the silence of the continents with movement. In those first shallow steps, they proved that life could exist beyond the ocean. Yet the most dramatic chapter came when vertebrates, animals with backbones, dared to leave the sea. This great transition began with lobe-finned fish, creatures with strong, fleshy fins that could push against the seabed. Over time, these fins grew sturdier, evolving into primitive limbs capable of supporting weight. Around 375 million years ago, a remarkable creature known as Tiktaalik appeared. Neither fully fish nor fully amphibian, Tiktaalik could swim in water but also prop itself up on land. It had a flat head, lungs as well as gills, and jointed fins that acted like protolegs. Tiktaalik is often celebrated as one of the most iconic transitional species in history, the bridge between swimming and walking, between water and land. In its slow crawl from shallow waters onto muddy banks, it symbolized one of the greatest steps life ever took. Following Tiktaalik came true amphibians, such as Ichthyostega and Acanthostega, which had more developed limbs and could spend significant time on land. Their movements were clumsy, their bodies still tied to the water for breeding and survival, but their footsteps were revolutionary. For the first time, the Earth's soil felt the pressure of vertebrate limbs. These creatures did not walk with elegance, but with effort, dragging their bodies forward in awkward strides. And yet, each movement was a victory, a declaration that life was no longer bound by the ocean. The Earth's surface, once empty of footprints, now bore the marks of living travelers. These first walkers did not know that their steps would shape the destiny of the planet. With each crawl and shuffle, they opened the door for reptiles, dinosaurs, mammals, and eventually humans. The courage of Tiktaalik and its descendants to step onto land was not just an evolutionary milestone, it was a defining moment in the history of life itself. The barren continents were no longer barren. They had become a new frontier, filled with possibility. Every forest, every grassland, every savanna that we know today exists because those first crawlers dared to move forward. The first crawlers and walkers remind us of what a step truly means. It is not always graceful. It is not always certain. But it is always progress. To leave behind the safety of the familiar and venture into the unknown is the essence of stepping forward. The creatures that dragged themselves onto land millions of years ago could not have imagined the towering dinosaurs or the thinking humans that would follow in their footsteps. Yet without their courage, none of it would have been possible. The first true steps on land belonged to them, the pioneers who transformed Earth from a water world into a world of walkers. Once life had found its way onto land, there was no turning back. The timid crawls of amphibians gradually gave rise to creatures more fully adapted to terrestrial existence. Over millions of years, some of these amphibians evolved into reptiles, animals whose scaly skin and hard-shelled eggs freed them from the constant pull of water. This independence was a revolution, for now life could spread into drier regions, colonizing deserts, forests, and plains. And with this new freedom came footsteps that were more confident, more permanent, and more powerful than ever before. The Earth was no longer the exclusive domain of the sea. It had become a kingdom of walkers. Among these reptiles, one lineage grew into the most iconic walkers the Earth has ever seen, the dinosaurs. From about 230 million years ago, their footsteps thundered across every continent. Some were massive, like the long-necked sauropods, whose every step could shake the ground like an earthquake. Others were swift and nimble, like the raptors, whose clawed feet left sharp imprints in the mud. Each step of a dinosaur was not just movement, it was dominance. They ruled the land, air, and seas for more than 160 million years, far longer than humans have existed. The Earth's landscapes echoed with their strides, from the slow, heavy plod of giants to the quick, darting runs of predators. If the first crawlers were the whisper of footsteps, the dinosaurs were the roar. But dinosaurs were not alone. Alongside them walked smaller creatures, early mammals. At first, these mammals were tiny, shrew-like beings, scurrying underfoot while dinosaurs reigned above. Their steps were light, cautious, and hidden in the shadows. Yet they, too, were pioneers, carrying the seeds of a future that would one day reshape the planet. They walked quietly, but within their fragile frames lay resilience and adaptability, traits that would prove more enduring than size or strength. The Earth during this time was a world of contrast. The footsteps of dinosaurs symbolized power and dominance, while the footsteps of mammals symbolized persistence and patience. Together, they filled the continents with life and motion. Fossilized footprints from this era tell stories of chases, migrations, and survival. They show us herds moving together for safety, predators stalking their prey, and young creatures learning to walk beside their parents. Each imprint pressed into the earth was a record of existence, a reminder that to step forward is to live, to struggle, and to endure. Then, around 66 million years ago, catastrophe struck. A massive asteroid collided with Earth, darkening the skies and wiping out the dinosaurs in a cataclysmic event. The footsteps that once shook the Earth suddenly ceased. Silence fell upon the land, broken only by the survivors, small mammals, birds, reptiles, and insects that endured the devastation. Out of this silence, a new chapter began. The mammals, once small and insignificant, now had the freedom to spread and evolve. Their cautious steps grew bolder. They expanded into forests, plains, and mountains, diversifying into new forms, some large and powerful, others agile and intelligent. The rise of mammals was not as sudden or dramatic as the reign of dinosaurs, but it was steady, purposeful, and enduring. Each step they took was a claim to survival in a changed world. The hooves of early ungulates, the padded feet of predators, and the nimble steps of primates all marked the unfolding of a new era. It was in this era that the footsteps of life began to take a shape that would eventually lead to us. Among the mammals, the primates emerged as special walkers and climbers, moving not only across the land but also through the trees. Their grasping hands and feet, their agile movements, and their social bonds prepared them for a destiny far greater than survival. The rise of dinosaurs and mammals teaches us that a step is more than just a mark in the soil. It is a story of dominance and endurance, of rise and fall. The dinosaurs stepped loudly, but their reign ended in silence. The mammals stepped quietly at first, but their persistence carried them forward into a future where intelligence would matter as much as strength. Each step across those ancient landscapes brought life closer to the moment when a new kind of walker would appear: the human. Long after the thunderous steps of the dinosaurs faded and the quiet but determined steps of mammals spread across the continents, a new kind of walker began to emerge, one who would eventually look up at the stars and ask questions about the world and themselves. These were the earliest humans, though they were not yet fully like us. The first true human steps were not just about movement. They were about discovery, adaptation, and the awakening of consciousness. Our story begins with the primates, creatures of the trees. Their steps were light, cautious, and often taken on branches high above the ground. Over millions of years, some of these primates descended from the trees to walk the savannas of Africa. Walking upright, bipedalism, was one of the greatest revolutions in our evolutionary journey. It freed the hands for tools, gestures, and carrying food. It gave us a higher vantage point, allowing us to spot danger and opportunity across the plains. Every upright step taken by these early hominins marked a turning point, the moment when we began to separate ourselves from other animals. One of the most iconic pieces of evidence for these early steps is the Litoli footprints in Tanzania, dated to about 3.6 million years ago. Preserved in volcanic ash, these footprints were left by members of Australopithecus afarensis, an ancestor of modern humans. They show 2 or 3 individuals walking upright, side by side, across a plain. These simple impressions in the earth carry profound meaning. They are not just fossilized tracks. They are echoes of lives lived, moments shared, and journeys undertaken. They tell us that our ancestors were already walking confidently, leaving behind marks that would outlast their bones, voices, and names. In those footsteps lies the essence of humanity's first steps on Earth. As evolution continued, other species of humans appeared, such as Homo habilis and Homo erectus. They walked longer distances, crafted tools, and even mastered the use of fire. Their steps were no longer limited to survival. They became steps of exploration and innovation. Homo erectus is known to have migrated out of Africa nearly 2 million years ago, spreading into Asia and Europe. Imagine those journeys, Small groups of humans walking across unknown landscapes, facing harsh climates and unfamiliar challenges. Each footstep carried not only the weight of a body, but also the courage to move into the unknown. With time, humans became masters of endurance walking. Unlike many other animals, we could travel long distances without tiring quickly, thanks to our upright posture and efficient stride. This endurance allowed us to hunt by persistence, following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. It also allowed us to migrate, slowly but steadily, into every corner of the earth. From the plains of Africa to the icy tundras of Siberia, from the deserts of Australia to the mountains of the Americas, human footsteps spread like a network across the globe. Wherever we went, we left traces of our passage, footprints, tools, art, and eventually civilizations. The first human steps were small in the beginning, but they carried within them the promise of everything we are today. They were the footsteps of survival, but also of curiosity. Unlike other creatures, we did not just step to feed ourselves or escape predators. We stepped toward the unknown, guided by a restless spirit. Each stride became more than a movement of the body. It became a movement of the mind and soul. To walk was to imagine, to seek, and to claim a place in the vastness of Earth. Those earliest human footsteps still echo in us today. Every path we walk, every road we travel, every migration we undertake as modern humans is built upon the courage of our ancestors who first stood tall and moved forward. The ground we tread upon carries their memory, just as the air we breathe carries their legacy. To ask who took the first step on Earth is to remember them, not only the nameless ancestors who left footprints in volcanic ash, but also the entire lineage of walkers who dared to rise, walk, and never stop moving forward. The first human steps across the savannas of Africa were steps of survival, finding food, escaping danger, and exploring new territories. But over time, our footsteps began to carry new meanings. They no longer belonged only to the hunter or the wanderer. They became the footsteps of the farmer, the builder, the traveler, and the dreamer. Humanity's steps transformed from mere movement to civilization itself. The earth, which had once only felt the passing of creatures and wild animals, now began to bear the imprints of human purpose. One of the greatest transformations came with the birth of agriculture around 10,000 years ago. Instead of endlessly roaming in search of food, humans began to settle in one place, planting seeds and domesticating animals. The first steps into cultivated fields were unlike any steps taken before. They were steps of creation. They marked the moment when humans shifted from being part of the wild to becoming shapers of the earth itself. Where once the land dictated human movement, now human footsteps directed the land, bending it to sow and reap. Villages grew where footsteps once wandered, and in time, those villages blossomed into cities. In these early civilizations, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Egypt, China, footsteps took on entirely new meanings. They became ceremonial, marching in processions to temples. They became political, walking into courts of kings and rulers. They became cultural, moving toward markets where goods and ideas were exchanged. Every step carried the weight of a new identity. Humanity was no longer just a species of walkers. It had become a species of builders, thinkers, and storytellers. Streets, once paths beaten down by wandering feet, were now carefully paved roads guiding footsteps toward collective progress. With civilization came journeys. Footsteps expanded into trade routes like the Silk Road, carrying not just goods but knowledge, culture, and faith across continents. Pilgrims' footsteps echoed across deserts and mountains, following spiritual paths to sacred sites. Explorers' steps led them to distant shores, expanding the map of the known world. In each case, footsteps were more than physical. They were symbolic of ambition, curiosity, and the eternal human desire to move beyond boundaries. The question of who took the first step on Earth had grown into another question. Who would take the next great step, and where would it lead? Civilization also brought permanence to human footsteps. The footprints of our ancestors were once washed away by rain or wind, but now, in stone temples, pyramids, and roads, their footsteps became immortal. Every monument is a frozen echo of countless feet that carried stones, mixed mortar, and built civilizations brick by brick. To walk on the stones of ancient cities today is to walk in the literal footsteps of those who shaped history. Their steps, preserved in architecture and ruins, remind us that walking forward is not only about survival but about leaving something behind. Yet with all this progress, the essence of the step remained the same. Whether it was a farmer stepping into a field, a soldier marching into battle, or a philosopher pacing while deep in thought, each step was a continuation of that original journey, the journey that began when life first moved in the oceans. The footsteps of civilization were louder, more deliberate, and more enduring than those of our primitive ancestors, but they were connected by the same unbroken chain of movement, survival, and curiosity. The first civilized steps of humanity marked not only a new chapter in our story, but also a new way of understanding the world. Walking was no longer just about reaching a destination. It was about creating meaning along the way. These footsteps built societies, carried ideas across continents, and laid the foundation for the modern world. Every time we step into a classroom, a marketplace, or a city street today, we are walking in the legacy of those first civilized steps. They remind us that to walk is to create, to connect, and to move history itself forward. When we look back at the vast sweep of Earth's history, the question, who took the first step on Earth, transforms from a simple curiosity into a profound meditation on life itself. The first step was not just one event, not just one creature pressing its foot against the soil. It was a chain of steps, each one building upon the last, each one necessary for the next to exist. The first stirrings of microbes in the ocean, the first crawls of trilobites across the seabed, the first lurch of Tiktaalik onto muddy banks, the thunderous strides of dinosaurs, the cautious footsteps of mammals, the upright strides of our human ancestors, and the deliberate steps of farmers and builders. Together they weave the story of every step that has ever been taken on this planet. To call one being the taker of the first step is to miss the truth. The first step belongs to all of them. Life itself was the one who took that step, moving from stillness to motion, from silence to song, from chaos to order. Each species, each creature, each human who walked before us carried forward the rhythm of life's eternal march. When microbes wiggled, when fish crawled, when apes stood tall, they were all part of the same journey, one that continues every time we put one foot in front of the other. The first step also teaches us something about courage. It was never easy to move forward. For the first organisms, the environment was hostile. For the first land animals, the risk of leaving the water was immense. For the first humans, walking into unknown territories meant facing hunger, predators, and uncertainty. And yet, again and again, life chose to move forward rather than stay still. That courage, embedded in the DNA of every living thing, is the very reason we are here today. To step is to take a risk, but it is also to embrace possibility. In our own lives, every step we take carries this legacy. When we walk into a new school, a new job, a new city, or even a new relationship, we are echoing that ancient story. We are repeating what life has always done, moving forward into the unknown, seeking survival, discovery, and meaning. The footsteps of the past are not just buried in fossil beds, they are alive within us. Every heartbeat, every stride, every ambition is a continuation of the first step that life took billions of years ago. Civilization itself has been defined by footsteps. The paths of explorers crossing oceans, the marches of armies shaping empires, the pilgrimages of seekers traveling to sacred lands, all of them extend the meaning of that first step. And beyond Earth, humanity has already taken another first step, when Neil Armstrong placed his foot on the moon in 1969. That moment was not only a triumph of technology, but also the ultimate echo of life's first step. From microbes in the sea to a human on another celestial body, the journey of steps has carried us farther than the first pioneers could ever have imagined. So, who took the first step on Earth? Was it the microbe, the trilobite, the Tiktaalik, the dinosaur, the first human, or the first farmer? The answer is all of them. Each one was a link in a chain, each one essential, each one an expression of life's unstoppable urge to move forward. The first step was not a single moment in history. It was the beginning of a pattern, a rhythm that has never ceased. It is the rhythm of progress, of survival, of hope. Today, as we walk our own paths, we are part of this unbroken story. Our footsteps carry not only our own weight, but the memory of every step that came before us. And one day, our steps too will become part of history, guiding those who follow into their own unknowns. The first step on Earth was not the end of a question. It was the start of a journey, one that continues with every stride we take. Life began when it dared to step forward, and it will continue as long as there are feet, fins, or even wheels to carry it into the future. In the end, the first step on Earth is more than science, more than history. It is a reminder. A reminder that progress always begins with a single act of movement. A reminder that courage is the heartbeat of existence. And above all, a reminder that no matter how small, no matter how uncertain, every step has the power to change the world.